It started with a scream. Not one of fear, but of defiance. A scream from a woman who had lived through segregation, marched for civil rights, and buried 2 sons before she ever expected to bury herself in silence. Her name was Gloria Hines, 67 years old, retired school principal, beloved community figure. She had walked the same path from church to the local library every Tuesday for almost 10 years. She wore her Sunday best even on weekdays, wide-brimmed hat, pressed skirt, and polished shoes. That day, she was walking alone, until Officer Kyle Bennett pulled up. What happened next didn't last more than 10 minutes. But it sparked a fire the city had tried to drown for decades. Officer Bennett, known to many as the silent enforcer, had a long record, unfiled reports, whispered warnings, internal affairs complaints that mysteriously disappeared. But no one ever stuck around long enough, or had enough proof, to expose him. Until Gloria. She asked why he stopped her. She asked why his hand was on his weapon. She asked why he was yelling at her like she'd done something wrong. And then, in front of a corner store with 10 eyewitnesses and a working security camera, he choked her. Not enough to kill. Just enough to humiliate. To remind her who held the power. What he didn't know was that Gloria's only living son held more power than he thought he did. And he wasn't about to let this humiliation on his mum go. If you think this is just another case of police misconduct, keep watching. Because this story isn't just about what happened on that sidewalk. It's about what was uncovered after. The rot inside a department. The secret alliances no one dared question. And the city's most powerful figures scrambling as one woman's voice broke through decades of silence. Subscribe now and stay until the end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. The sky was gray that afternoon. One of those days that felt like it held a storm behind its breath. Gloria Hines clutched her handbag close as she stepped off the number 7 bus. She didn't like taking rides from people. She said it gave her legs purpose, and her spirit routine. The street was quiet. A few teens loitered near the corner shop, laughing over some TikTok video. A young mother wheeled a stroller with one hand and scrolled her phone with the other. Nothing unusual. Until the police cruiser crept down the block. Gloria noticed it right away. She'd taught herself to always be aware of patrol cars. Not because she was guilty of anything, but because she'd lived long enough to know what assumptions looked like when they wore a badge. The car slowed as it neared the sidewalk. She kept walking. "Ma'am," the officer called out. His voice wasn't friendly. It was rehearsed, like a man who had said the same line 100 times and never cared once how it landed. Gloria turned. "Yes, officer? Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" She blinked. "Walking to the library. It's Tuesday. Got some ID?" She raised a brow. "For going to the library? I asked you for identification." She set her purse down on the bench nearby, her hands slow and steady. Inside, her old wallet had the faded ID she rarely used, but she retrieved it nonetheless. Bennett didn't even glance at it. Instead, he stepped closer. "You got any weapons, ma'am?" That's when Gloria's face changed. Not into fear. Into disappointment. "You really think I'm carrying?" Bennett didn't answer. He was already reaching for her arm. "I don't consent to being touched," she said calmly. But he didn't care. With a sudden shove, he spun her around and pushed her against the brick wall. Gasps echoed from nearby pedestrians. Someone dropped their grocery bag. Gloria's hat fell off. And then, his hand closed around her throat. "Stop resisting," he growled. "I'm not resisting," she choked out. That's when the voice cut through the chaos. "She's the new city attorney's mother." Everything paused. Bennett's grip loosened, briefly. But by then, the phone cameras were up. The corner store clerk had already pressed the panic button. And somewhere on the city's emergency line, a dispatcher flagged a level 3 protocol. Because this wasn't just excessive force. This was political suicide. Gloria stumbled back, coughing as bystanders rushed to her. Bennett cursed under his breath and stepped back, trying to salvage the moment with protocol commands. "Back up." I said back up. But it was too late. The story had already started. And across town, someone else's phone buzzed. The city hadn't felt this tense since the 2014 protests. That night, local news led with shaky phone footage. An elderly black woman in a flowered skirt, slammed against a wall, fingers clawing for air, an officer's hand around her throat. The headline read, "Retired Principal Assaulted by Officer, Identified as Mother of New City Attorney." The footage went viral before the 6 o'clock news even aired. Gloria's name trended on Twitter next to #JusticeForGloria. Facebook groups that once posted church bake sale flyers were now sharing petitions demanding Officer Bennett's suspension. What began as whispers in one neighborhood quickly surged through every corner of the city. At precinct headquarters, the mood was electric, part fear, part fury. Officers exchanged glances, tension lingering in every hallway like a thundercloud refusing to break. Captain Donnelly sat in his glass office, red-faced and pacing, watching the footage on repeat. He knew what it meant. Not just a scandal. Not just another bad cop headline. This one had teeth. Political teeth. He slammed the remote down. "Get Bennett in here. Now." Bennett sat stone-faced across the captain's desk. His knuckles were white. His uniform shirt still had the faint smear of Gloria's makeup near the collar. "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" Donnelly barked. She was being combative. "She was 67, Bennett corrected, unblinking. Donnelly's jaw twitched. "You laid hands on a respected community figure in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, and you didn't even run her ID through the system? She had something in her purse. I thought it could have been—" "Oh, stop it. Don't play the 'I feared for my life' card." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Donnelly leaned forward. "You listen to me. The new city attorney? He's Gloria Hines' son. And he's already filed an emergency request for your body cam footage and full disciplinary history." Bennett finally blinked. "They won't find anything." "Not because you didn't do anything," Donnelly snapped. "Because we buried it. But if you think that will save you this time, you're dumber than you look." A knock at the door interrupted them. An intern from Record stepped in, eyes wide. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed Donnelly a manila folder. He opened it slowly. Inside was a printed screenshot from a whistleblower email. The subject line, "Internal Video Archive Dump, Officer Bennett History." The footage had leaked. And this time, it wasn't just about Gloria. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Miles Hines stood before a row of reporters. He hadn't planned to go public yet. He was still reviewing evidence, still preparing his legal team. But the city didn't wait. And neither would he. "This isn't just about my mother," he said, his voice steady. "This is about a system that allowed Officer Bennett to operate unchecked. And I promise you this, every name that was silenced by his badge will be heard." A reporter shouted, "Do you plan to pursue criminal charges?" Miles looked into the cameras, eyes full of resolve. "I plan to do my job." Back at the precinct, Bennett's desk was cleared. Administrative leave. Badge turned in. Gun holstered but locked away. He sat outside the IA interview room, alone, watching his fellow officers avoid eye contact. The ones who once laughed at his jokes. The ones who covered for him. None of them dared look his way now. The blue wall was cracking. And for the first time in his career, Officer Kyle Bennett wasn't protected. Across town, Gloria sat in her living room, her bruises still fresh. She watched the news replay her pain over and over again. Each time it aired, her stomach twisted, but she didn't turn it off. Her son stood behind her, hand gently on her shoulder. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" he asked. She nodded. "I was ready the moment he touched me." In the final moments of the day, as night settled over the city, a strange calm took hold. But beneath it, something old and dangerous had awakened. Not rage, not revenge, but truth. And truth, once spoken, doesn't go quietly. The file didn't arrive in a flashy email. It wasn't posted to Twitter. There was no dramatic press conference. It simply appeared, like a ghost, on the internal network used by the city's Office of Civil Oversight. Untraceable. Unrequested. Just one folder labeled, Bennett_archive. Inside were 37 video clips, 12 audio recordings, and 24 redacted internal memos. each one more damning than the last. The kind of evidence that didn't just get overlooked. It got erased on purpose. And now it was back. At the oversight office, analyst Kendra Brooks clicked through the first few files, her heart pounding. One clip showed Officer Bennett slamming a teenager onto a car hood during a routine traffic stop. Another showed him mocking a homeless veteran, threatening arrest unless he moved his stink elsewhere. The dates stretched back 10 years. Each one paired with a timestamp, badge cam ID, and a note, case closed, lack of evidence. Except now, the evidence was right in front of her. Kendra stood up so fast her chair clattered backward. She didn't even grab her coat, just her phone and a flash drive, and ran straight to her supervisor's office. "We have to escalate this," she said breathlessly. "Now." Meanwhile, across the city, in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, a man named Elijah Carter watched the news with trembling hands. He was the ghost in the system. The ex-cop. The one who left without explanation. The one no one talked about anymore. But Elijah hadn't forgotten. He had once shared a squad car with Bennett. Had seen him plant evidence. Had watched him rough up suspects in blind spots, just far enough from his body cam to claim they fell. Elijah had tried to file reports. Quiet ones. The kind that might spark an investigation without destroying a career. Instead, he was iced out. Labeled unstable. Forced into early retirement under the guise of stress-related health concerns. But Elijah wasn't crazy. And he wasn't done. 3 weeks ago, he'd hacked into the precinct's forgotten cold storage server. It was supposed to be wiped clean every fiscal year. But someone missed a step. Elijah didn't. He downloaded everything. Reviewed it for days. Watched hours of footage until he felt like vomiting. And when Gloria Hines' name hit the news, he knew the time had come. Because 10 years earlier, she had defended him. When his termination went public, Gloria, then a principal, wrote a letter to the mayor. Said Elijah was the only officer who ever walked kids home from her school after dark. That he was one of the good ones. And no one listened. But he had. And now he would return the favor. Miles Hines was in his office when the flash drive arrived. No note. Just a sealed envelope with one line written in thick Sharpie. They buried the truth. I dug it back up. He plugged it in. Watched in silence. His fingers tightened on the desk. There was case after case. The missing links that made every complaint seem like a coincidence. A rogue report here, a suppressed video there. Patterns that internal affairs never disclosed. Patterns that pointed to something far worse than a bad cop. It was a system. And Bennett wasn't the disease. He was a symptom. The next morning, the city buzzed with rumors. A new report. A coming press conference. A reckoning. And at the center of it all, a name no one expected to hear again. Elijah Carter. He hadn't spoken publicly in nearly a decade. But now, he sat down with a journalist from the city's most respected independent outlet, holding nothing back. He spoke of the quotas. Of the intimidation tactics used on officers who asked too many questions. Of the day he saw Bennett stomp on a kid's backpack, claiming it contained drug evidence, when all it held was textbooks and a lunchbox. His voice didn't shake. His eyes didn't blink. He was done being silent. The article dropped at 9 a.m. sharp. The Ghost Cops Files. Inside the department's decade of dirty secrets. It exploded across every major platform. Morning radio shows quoted it. News anchors dissected it. Retired officers called in with stories they had buried for years. By noon, the mayor was in emergency meetings. By 3 p.m., the district attorney launched a full independent investigation. And by nightfall, the city had changed. Not on the surface. Not yet. But underground, within the hearts of people who had been gaslit for decades, a shift had started. They weren't crazy. They weren't paranoid. They had been right. Back in her living room, Gloria turned off the television. She'd seen enough. Miles sat beside her, his laptop open with a dozen tabs on the case. Gloria reached over and closed it. "Let the world read now," she said gently. "We've done our part." Miles smiled, the weariness finally cracking. But just as he leaned back, his phone buzzed. A message. No name. No number. Just one line. Bennett isn't the only one. Because even when the whistle is blown, sometimes it only scratches the surface. And the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. The flash drive came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no markings, just one word written in sharp black ink. Truth. It was slid beneath the door of Miles Hines' office at City Hall just after midnight. No security camera caught the drop. Whoever delivered it knew how to avoid being seen. Miles had just returned from a press briefing and hadn't even taken off his tie. The envelope sat like a quiet dare on his desk. He stared at it for a full minute before breaking the seal. Inside, one flash drive. Encrypted. Password protected. Attached was a folded post-it note with a single line. Use the name of the boy he blamed. Miles felt a cold chill move down his spine. There had been rumors, old ones, about Officer Bennett and a shooting that was never filed. A boy shot in the back near Westgate Playground, years ago. Bennett claimed he saw the kid reaching. There was no weapon, no charge, no arrest, and no justice. The boy's name was Andre Tillman, 17 years old, buried in a closed casket. His mother moved states after the city refused to press charges. Miles typed it in, Andre Tillman 17. The screen unlocked. A folder appeared, Internal Suppression Cases, Bennett. Miles clicked it open. Dozens of video files. Confidential memos. Redacted reports with original versions restored. Complaints with timestamps. Footage from body cams never filed into evidence. Each file a buried truth clawing its way back to daylight. He scrolled through name after name. Ramon De Leon, assaulted during a traffic stop. Keisha Moore, falsely arrested and hospitalized. Eric Watkins, tossed while unarmed and mentally ill. Tina Howell, body cam shows her crying as Bennett laughed. And then his mother, Gloria Hines, 06/04/20XX, verbal warning, no action taken. No action taken? He clicked the video. It was raw footage from the corner store. The moment Officer Bennett reached for Gloria's throat. And beside it was a second angle. Security footage. From behind. Capturing it all with haunting clarity. Miles leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. The air in the room felt heavier. He picked up his phone. Eva, he said to his assistant, voice hoarse. Wake the team. We're going to court. Meanwhile, back in her home, Gloria sat at the dining table, flipping slowly through an old photo album. Her fingers paused on a photo of Miles in middle school, wide-eyed, gap-toothed, smiling. She had raised him on firm love, soft words, and stories of Harriet, Malcolm, and Rosa. Not because she expected him to lead battles, but because she wanted him to understand what silence cost. Now, silence was no longer an option. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find Leona Charles, a woman she hadn't seen in almost 15 years. Leona? Gloria asked, blinking. Leona nodded, eyes misted. I saw the footage. And I remembered. Remote. Keisha. Tina. I remember what he did to my nephew. Gloria stepped aside, motioned her in. Leona pulled out a notebook. We've been keeping track. All of us. Just waiting for someone to finally make it matter. She opened the book. A list of names. Dates. Badge numbers. Notes scribbled in the margins. This is the unofficial record, Leona said. Bennett's shadow file. Gloria's hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the ink. He hurt so many, she whispered. Leona nodded. But you survived. And you made noise. At the precinct, panic was blooming. Someone inside had leaked files that weren't supposed to exist. The chief issued a gag order. Internal Affairs was scrambling to identify the whistleblower. But suspicion had already turned inward. Every desk glance felt like an accusation. Every closed door felt like a conspiracy. Officer Bennett, benched and bitter, paced the confines of his temporary holding office. His lawyer had called 3 times that morning. He ignored all of them. He wasn't thinking about strategy. He was thinking about revenge. Not just on Gloria, but on whoever betrayed the silence that had always protected him. Across the city, community halls were filling. Old heads. Young organizers. Journalists. Church leaders. People who hadn't spoken in years now sat in circles, passing around names like folded prayers. At one table, a former dispatcher admitted she'd been told to reroute certain calls whenever Bennett's name came up. At another, a janitor from precinct headquarters confessed he'd once seen a trash can filled with torn-up complaint forms, names he'd never forget. And in the back of every room, a flyer was being passed around. Town hearing, public forum on officer misconduct, hosted by city attorney's office. The date? 1 week from today. The city wasn't just awake. It was preparing for war. Late that evening, Gloria stood at her window, watching as the streetlights flickered to life. Miles walked in, coat damp from the rain, flash drive still in his coat pocket. "They tried to bury it all," he said quietly. Gloria didn't turn. "But they forgot something." "What's that?" "We're not afraid of dirt. We've been planting truth in it for centuries." Miles smiled, walked over, and kissed her forehead. "We've got a list, Ma." She nodded. "Then let's use it." There are two kinds of silence in a city like this. One that whispers, and one that roars. By the morning after the leak, City Hall was on fire, but not the kind the public could see. No sirens. No smoke. Just the scurry of polished shoes down marble corridors and the frantic shuffle of aides whispering behind closed doors. Phones didn't stop ringing. Emails didn't stop coming. And behind every locked office, a power player was asking the same question. How much did they know? The whistleblowers' archive hadn't just named Officer Bennett. It mapped a pattern. Every chokehold. Every false report. Every complaint that somehow disappeared before it reached disciplinary review. It was a digital graveyard, and someone had just dug up the bodies. Mayor Wilkins, always poised in public, looked like a man cracking under pressure. His usual confidence was gone. His chief of staff, Darius Boone, stood over him with a trembling tablet in hand. "It's all in there," Boone muttered. Emails, redacted interviews, even a signed memo from Internal Affairs refusing to investigate after Bennett broke a teenager's wrist in 21. The mayor ran a hand down his face. "Jesus. They're calling it a department-wide failure. It's more than failure. This is radioactive." Across town, news anchors stumbled over their words as they updated the story. Gloria's assault had ignited something raw, but the documents? They turned the flame into a wildfire. Civil rights groups called for immediate investigations. Legal teams filed injunctions. Protesters began organizing a march for the weekend. But the real trouble was happening behind the scenes. Because buried in the files, beneath the list of victims, under years of misconduct, was a series of email chains. Signatures. Decisions. High-ranking officials who looked the other way. Judges who quietly denied motions for review. Chiefs who signed off on insufficient evidence when complaints piled up like snow. They hadn't just covered for Bennett. They built the wall he hid behind. In a quiet diner on the city's south side, Gloria stirred her tea with one hand and held a yellow notepad in the other. She sat across from Miles, her son, the city attorney whose name was suddenly on every channel. "You're calm," he said, studying her. "I've lived long enough to know the difference between noise and power," Gloria replied. "They're loud. That means they're scared." Miles nodded. "I filed an emergency order. I want full discovery on Officer Bennett's personnel file. If we're lucky, the judge won't be in their pocket." Gloria looked out the window. "We won't be lucky. We'll be ready." Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Judge Emery Whitmore leaned back in his chair and tapped the side of a manila envelope with his knuckles. His clerk had just brought him news of the whistleblower dump. His name hadn't appeared in the documents, not directly, but he knew the implications. He remembered 2019, a case against Bennett that mysteriously stalled. A file he personally ordered sealed. Whitmore wasn't a cruel man. He was practical. And practicality, in this city, meant self-preservation. Now that preservation was cracking. Down the block, behind the heavy doors of Precinct 14, the remaining loyalists circled the wagons. Captain Donnelly stood before a cluster of senior officers, Men who'd once toasted Bennett's promotions, men whose hands were as dirty as the walls were blue. "We're not getting out of this untouched," Donnelly said flatly. "But if we want to survive, we stick to protocol. No one talks to press. No one admits knowledge. Every statement goes through legal." "Legal?" Sergeant Phelps scoffed. "You mean the same legal team that's already leaking?" Donnelly's eyes narrowed. "You got something to confess?" Silence. Because now it wasn't just about Officer Bennett. It was about everyone who stood behind him. Back at Gloria's modest home, a knock came at the door just after sunset. It was quiet, almost hesitant. Miles opened it to find a woman in her early 30s, hood pulled low, glancing over her shoulder. "Can I come in?" she whispered. Her name was Kendra Hale, a former precinct clerk who'd disappeared 2 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Everyone thought she'd moved, changed jobs, started over. But she hadn't. She'd been watching. "You're the whistleblower?" Miles asked after she stepped inside. Kendra nodded. "I kept copies. Every time something went missing, I saved it. I used burner drives. Hines. I knew one day this city would need to see." Gloria looked at her carefully. "Why now?" Kendra's voice cracked. "Because they threatened my sister last month. She's only 15. And when I saw what he did to you, I knew, this has to end." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. "This one? It has names. Judges. Union heads. Every time someone signed off on a cover-up." Miles stared at it like it held a match. Because it did. By midnight the story had turned. Gloria wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a catalyst. Kendra's files added fuel to a movement already rising in volume. Protests swelled from dozens to hundreds. Someone projected Gloria's image onto a downtown building with the words, "She spoke. We heard." At City Hall, the mayor called an emergency session. Lawyers scrambled. Officials whispered about resignations. And in every neighborhood that had once felt powerless, people started to believe something was shifting. Not just outrage, but reckoning. Real, dangerous reckoning. And through it all, Gloria stayed silent. Not because she was afraid. Because she knew, the louder they screamed, the more scared they were. And she wasn't done yet. The courtroom buzzed like a live wire. Outside, protesters filled the courthouse steps, holding signs, chanting, recording live. It was the biggest trial the city had seen in decades. Not because of who was on trial, but because of who had finally brought him there. Inside, the air felt electric. Reporters jostled for camera angles. Legal aides whispered in corners. The tension was so thick it swallowed every breath. Then, the door creaked open. Gloria Hines stepped in. Not with a cane. Not with assistance. But with quiet fire in every step. Her bruises had faded, but her poise hadn't. The court fell silent as she took her seat behind the prosecution table, right next to her son, City Attorney Miles Hines. He didn't wear his grief on his sleeve. He wore resolve. A steel-cut look in his eyes that made even the judge shift slightly when he entered. "Case 478B, the clerk called out. State of Redacted versus Officer Kyle Bennett." The bailiff brought Bennett in from the side door, shackled and stiff-jawed. He was in a suit, not a uniform. But it didn't hide the stench of arrogance still clinging to him. His lawyer, a city-hired mouthpiece who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, whispered something to him, but Bennett didn't respond. Judge Whitmore, an older black woman known for her fierce neutrality, peered down over her glasses. "Mr. Bennett, you are charged with assault, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to suppress evidence. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," he said, voice low but unapologetic. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Miles didn't flinch. The prosecution began by laying the groundwork, a timeline of misconduct. They showed patterns, complaints filed by citizens, all mysteriously dismissed. They revealed Bennett's name popping up in more than 24 use-of-force incidents, nearly all involving minorities. None made it past internal affairs. But the real fireworks came when the whistleblower evidence was introduced. Kendra Hale, nervous, hands shaking, took the stand. Former administrative assistant. She wore a simple blouse and carried a box of hard drives like it held the weight of justice itself. "I didn't plan to be involved," she said. "But I couldn't sleep. Not after I saw what happened to Mrs. Hines." "What did you see in the records?" Miles asked from the prosecutor's table. She took a breath. "I saw a pattern. I saw video after video, redacted, deleted, mislabeled. All from Bennett's patrol vehicle or body cam. But someone kept copies in the backup drive. They didn't know I still had admin access." The judge leaned forward. "What kind of videos, Ms. Hale?" She turned to the screen as a clip began to play. A dashcam. A Latino teenager. Hands up. Bennett slamming him to the ground for talking back. Another clip. A homeless woman being berated, her cart kicked over. Another. A father pulled over for a broken tail light, handcuffed in front of his crying children. Each video stabbed like a blade. Gloria had to look away. But the jurors? They looked closer. The prosecution laid it all out. A legacy of intimidation. Of silence. Of systemic rot that festered because no one had the guts, or the power, to stop it. Until now. After a short recess, the court reconvened. Miles stepped to the front of the room. "I'd like to call my final witness, Gloria Hines." The room held its breath. Gloria rose slowly. Not because she was weak, but because she wanted them to feel every step. She raised her right hand, took the oath, and sat down. "Mrs. Hines," Miles began, "would you please describe what happened on the day of the incident?" Her voice was calm, but her words were sharpened glass. "I was walking home from the pharmacy. I just picked up my prescription. I wasn't doing anything unusual. Just existing. That's when I saw the patrol car. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just smiled." She paused, letting that word hang. Because sometimes, when you're black, a smile is your armor. The jury leaned in. "He asked for ID. I gave it. He asked about weapons. I told him no. But then he grabbed me, pushed me, slammed me into the wall like I was made of bricks instead of bones. And when I asked why, he choked me." Her voice cracked just once. "I couldn't breathe. Not just because of his hands, but because I knew in that moment, he didn't see a woman. He didn't see a grandmother. He saw a threat." She glanced at Bennett. He looked down. "I survived that day. But many don't. And if I had stayed quiet, maybe you wouldn't be sitting here now." The courtroom sat stunned. Miles gave her a small nod. No further questions. The defense didn't even cross-examine. What could they say? By the time the court recessed again, news headlines had already begun forming. "Gloria speaks. Chokehold trial rocks City Hall. Body cam leak blows open police scandal. Justice, long denied, now demands attention." Outside, the protest swelled. Inside, as Miles walked his mother back to her seat, she whispered, "He didn't just choke me. He choked every woman like me who's ever been told to keep her head down." He gripped her hand. "Not anymore." That evening, as the courtroom emptied, Judge Whitmore scheduled closing arguments for the following week. No verdict yet. But the writing was on the wall. For Officer Kyle Bennett, it was no longer a matter of whether he would fall. It was how hard, and how many would fall with him. It was raining again, heavy, unrelenting. The kind of rain that drums against windows like it's trying to tell you something. The city was soaked in tension, and inside the courtroom, the air was heavier than the clouds outside. Gloria Hines sat motionless in the front row. Her son, Miles, adjusted his tie beside her, though his eyes never left the front of the courtroom. This was the day the prosecution had been building toward. The day they would peel back the years of silence and put them on the record. The first to take the stand was Sergeant Dion Rhodes, a name not many people had heard until now, but someone every officer in the department knew. 30 years in the force, and until that moment, not a single blemish. Dion had served alongside Kyle Bennett in the early days. What he knew had kept him up for years. He cleared his throat. "In 2008, we were called to a domestic disturbance," he began. Standard stuff. But Bennett, he escalated it. Woman had a bruised eye and a crying kid behind her skirt. Instead of calming the scene, he slammed the man into a wall and laughed while he bled. said it felt good to watch trash break. Gasps echoed from the audience. Did you report it? The prosecutor asked. Rhodes hesitated. Tried. My lieutenant told me to keep the peace in-house. Said, and I quote, Bennett's protected. Let it go. The judge's gavel slammed down. Order in the court. But the courtroom wouldn't calm. Not now. That phrase, Bennett's protected, spread like gasoline on fire. Next came the files. Hundreds of them. Some from HR, some from internal affairs, and many, too many, from anonymous sources. One, dated April 2015, detailed a stop involving a teenage boy named Kian Jackson. According to the file, Kian was riding his bike home when Bennett stopped him for looking jumpy. Kian ended up in the hospital with a broken wrist. No charges. No footage. No follow-up. Another file showed a pattern of deleted body cam footage linked to Bennett. 15 instances in 4 years. Always marked equipment error. One of the jurors looked visibly shaken. Another wiped her eyes. Bennett sat like stone, jaw locked, refusing to flinch. Then came the most damning testimony of all. A young woman walked to the stand, early 20s, trembling. She clutched a worn journal in both hands. My name is Tasha. My brother, Elijah, was arrested by Bennett 3 years ago. He was charged with assault after a schoolyard fight. He was only 17. He had a scholarship pending. He never came home the same after that night. She opened her journal. It was filled with drawings, handwritten notes, therapy quotes. Elijah told me he was choked. That Bennett laughed in his face. That he said, "No one will believe you, thug." She paused. 3 months later, Elijah died by suicide. Silence. Complete silence. Not even the judge moved. Gloria covered her mouth, a silent sob escaping her throat. Tasha looked out over the courtroom. My brother mattered. Even if no one in that department acted like he did. But I'm here now. Saying his name. Making sure you all hear it. She stepped down. A ripple of emotion surged through the room. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered under umbrellas and hoods. They watched the live stream on their phones, murmuring prayers and swearing oaths. Not just for justice, but for every name that hadn't made the news. For the kids silenced in back alleys, for the fathers buried under bad headlines, for the mothers who carried pain with no outlet. Inside, Miles Hines leaned forward. They'll try to bury this, he whispered to the prosecutor. They'll try to settle, seal, spin it. We're not letting that happen, she replied. We can't. Not anymore. Later that evening, the DA's office received a plain manila envelope. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note. They covered for him. I won't. Here's everything. I saved copies. Don't trust the brass. The footage on the drive was raw. Unedited. No time codes. But it was real. One clip showed Bennett and another officer laughing after a traffic stop that ended in a black teenager being tossed unnecessarily. Another showed Bennett boasting in a locker room, "It doesn't touch me. I'm Donnelly's ace." The final clip? Gloria. Clear as day. No resisting. No threat. Just a woman standing with dignity, and being choked anyway. The next morning, the city woke up to the truth, aired across every channel, shared on every screen. Breaking, new evidence confirms pattern of abuse by Officer Kyle Bennett. City attorney promises full prosecution. Some wept. Others cheered. But all were watching. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Bennett watched it all unfold through the thick glass of the guard station TV. He didn't move. Didn't blink. But the faintest twitch of his lip betrayed him. It wasn't regret. It was fear. For the first time in his career, the walls he trusted were crumbling around him. And this time, no one was reaching out to save him. Gloria sat at her kitchen table that night. Miles poured her tea, but she barely touched it. They said his trial date is moving up, he told her. She looked out the window. Good. Are you ready to testify again? She turned toward him. Baby, I've been ready my whole life. The morning after the televised city hearing, Gloria Hines woke to the sound of shattering glass. It wasn't the birds. Not the wind. It was the window by her front porch, blown out by a brick. Her son, Miles, was already downstairs. He'd stayed the night again, unable to shake the fear that the truth they exposed had stirred the wrong hive. Now, barefoot in his pajamas, he rushed to the porch, ducking instinctively as another object crashed against the siding. This time, a flaming rag stuffed in a liquor bottle. A Molotov cocktail. It burst against the exterior wall, igniting the dried ivy that clung to the house like a ghost from better days. "Mom, out!" he shouted, grabbing her arm, pulling her away from the front door. Smoke bled into the hallway like black ink in water. Alarms wailed. They made it out through the back, coughing and breathless, as neighbors screamed and garden hoses flailed uselessly at the flames. The fire department came fast, but the damage had already set in. The message was clear. Gloria's voice had been too loud. And someone, somewhere, wanted her silenced. By midday, local news crews had surrounded the smoldering shell of her porch. Her neighbors huddled together in housecoats and sandals, trying to comfort her with offers of tea and folded lawn chairs. But Gloria refused to sit. "I stood up to them once. I'm not sitting now." Miles was pacing nearby, phone pressed to his ear, barking into it. "This wasn't random. Don't tell me this was random." He stopped only when a cruiser pulled up to the edge of the street. Detective Sierra Monroe stepped out. Unlike most cops on the force, she didn't wear smugness like armor. She was young, Latina, and had once been mentored by Gloria's late husband, a fact not lost on either of them. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. Gloria nodded, jaw clenched. "You know who did it?" Miles asked. Monroe looked at the scorched siding, then back at them. "No fingerprints on the bottle. No street cams on this block. It's clean. Professional." Gloria narrowed her eyes. "Not professional. Cowardly." Monroe took a breath. "I'm going to be honest. This wasn't just a message. This was a warning to stop. And they're not just aiming at you anymore." She handed Miles a sealed envelope. No return address. No postage. He opened it and froze. Inside were printed screenshots of his personal emails. Emails about witnesses, case strategies, internal whistleblower leads. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "We don't know," Monroe replied. "But it means one thing. Someone inside is feeding your moves to the other side." That evening, in a hidden office above a used appliance store, the real meeting happened. Miles had gathered the only people he trusted: Monroe, Janice, the whistleblower, a civil rights attorney named Devin Ellis, and his mother. No suits. No cameras. Just files, USBs, and fear thick in the air. Janice looked shaken. Her laptop was open, displaying a new set of documents. "There's a second list," she said. "Not just complaints about Bennett. It's a spreadsheet." "Of what?" Gloria asked. Janice hesitated. "Names. Black residents targeted for random stops. Some were falsely charged. Others were pressured into giving up community members as informants. Some just disappeared." Devin leaned in. "Are you saying it's a targeted harassment program?" Janice nodded slowly. "Coded under something called Operation Quiet Ground. It was run under the pretense of crime prevention, but it's mostly used to control and suppress dissent." Gloria felt her breath catch. "My name's on it?" Janice didn't answer. Instead, she turned the screen. Row 17, Hines, Gloria. Flagged for proximity to community organizing. Uncooperative. Monitor activity. Miles slammed his hand on the table. "They've been watching her?" "They've been watching all of us," Janice whispered. "Including you." The room fell silent. Until Monroe spoke again. "If this list goes public, it'll burn the whole department down. But it'll also put targets on every single person in this room." Gloria leaned forward, eyes fierce. "Then light the match." 2 hours later, the video was live. Miles released a public statement backed by the whistleblower files. Devin filed a civil suit with supporting affidavits. And Monroe submitted a sealed report to the state attorney general. Within minutes, the internet exploded. #QuietGround trended on X. Commentators dissected every line of the leaked spreadsheet. And the city? It turned to chaos. Protests surged again. Students, mothers, clergy, union workers, all flooding downtown with signs reading, "We are not your targets," and "Stop Operation Quiet Ground." In the shadows, another figure stirred. Captain Donnelly, still clinging to his position by a thread, threw the latest report across his desk. "Find out who leaked this," he growled. An officer stepped in. "Sir, we already did." He held out a photo. It wasn't Janice. It was Monroe. At her apartment, Monroe packed quickly. She knew what was coming. The department wouldn't go down without clawing. And she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her badge sat quietly on her kitchen table. She looked at it for a long time. Then she left it behind. Back at the charred remains of her porch, Gloria sat on a folding chair with a blanket over her lap. Miles returned from yet another late-night meeting. "They'll come again," he said softly. "I know," she replied. He sat beside her. "You scared?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "No, because the fire they set? It only proved the truth was dangerous. And dangerous truth has a way of burning back. The truth doesn't whisper, it waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't knock. It detonates." That was the feeling in the makeshift war room above the old appliance store, where Miles, Gloria, Monroe, Janice, and Devin had reconvened. The room smelled like cold coffee and burning nerves. Everyone knew they were close. Too close. Janice clicked on a folder she'd recovered from an encrypted drive. Labeled plainly, T-Archive 19A. "There's over 80 hours of footage here," she said. "All from internal dashcams, bodycams, and traffic polls, stored in a forgotten subdirectory that someone forgot to wipe." "What's on it?" Miles asked, already knowing the answer. "Everything." The first video was dated 3 years prior. Officer Kyle Bennett. Bodycam footage. The screen flickered to life, pixelated at first, then clear. A black teenager, no older than 17, was walking down Martin Street at dusk. Hands in hoodie. Headphones on. He never saw the cruiser until it cut him off. "Hands where I can see 'em." Bennett barked. "No, wait," the teen stammered, startled. It took less than 10 seconds for Bennett to force him to the ground. He kneed the boy's neck, cuffed him, slammed his phone into the concrete. The charge? Failure to comply. The boy cried for his mother. You could hear it. No weapon. No threat. No cause. Just another name in the file. Another tape. Different year. Same officer. This time, a woman in her late 30s was pulled over for weaving. Her kids were in the back seat. She asked for a reason. He dragged her out. She was left bleeding on the sidewalk while a rookie watched and didn't intervene. These weren't outliers. This was a pattern. An ecosystem. And as the footage piled on, so did the names, cross-referenced with the Operation Quiet Ground list. Most of the people caught in these videos had some history of community organizing, advocacy, or even just showing up to city council meetings. This isn't policing, Monroe said. This is suppression. Gloria closed her eyes. No, this is war. And we've just found their war logs. But one tape was different. It didn't have a date stamp. It had a name, G.Hines_only.mp4. Everyone froze. Janice hesitated before pressing play. A static hum filled the room. Then, a conversation. Bennett's voice, unmistakable. Her name's Hines. Yeah, the principal. But more than that, she's a problem. Her son just got in. If she starts talking, it won't stop. Then a second voice, raspy, older. Make it clean. Intimidate. No bruises we can't explain. And the cameras? Loop them. Or say they malfunctioned. Same as always. Static again. The file ended. Gloria's hand trembled. She looked at Miles. They planned it. He nodded. They targeted you. And they expected me to break. She sat up straighter. They don't know me. Within 24 hours, the tapes had been transferred to 3 separate secure servers. Devin prepared a formal press packet. Monroe was working her contacts in the state's Bureau of Civil Rights. And Janice had anonymously shared a handful of the tapes with a national journalist who specialized in exposing systemic injustice. But the most powerful move? That came from Gloria herself. She stood before a packed City Hall auditorium. The walls buzzed with reporters and residents. Everyone had seen the news. Everyone had heard the voice memo. But now, they would hear hers. "I was told to stay quiet," she began. "That my bruises would heal faster than the system would change." She looked directly at the mayor. "Then I was told, by action, if not by words, that I wasn't supposed to survive the smoke they sent to my doorstep." The crowd murmured. "But I'm still standing." Thunderous applause followed. She waited. Then, there are over 40 names in those tapes. Women. Teenagers. Parents. Students. And not one of them asked to be a symbol. Her voice caught, but only for a moment. "So I'm not here as a symbol either. I'm here as a witness. And I'm here to say, we see you now. We know what you've done." She paused. "And we're not waiting for permission to tear it all down." The next morning, a judge issued a preliminary injunction. Internal Affairs began reopening all use-of-force cases linked to Officer Bennett and his partners over the past 10 years. 2 deputy chiefs resigned. Captain Donnelly was placed under federal investigation. But even as walls came down, danger remained. Miles received a call from a blocked number. "They're not done," a voice warned. "You've gone too far. There's more than just Bennett. If you dig too deep, they'll bury you with it." He saved the number. Then turned to Monroe. "Do we keep going?" She didn't hesitate. "Until there's nothing left to hide." That night, Gloria stood alone on what was once her front porch, now rebuilt by neighbors who refused to let her fall alone. A child rode by on a bike and waved. A woman she didn't know dropped off fresh baked bread. And on the sidewalk, someone had chalked a message in big bold letters. "Let the truth speak." She smiled softly. Then went inside. Because in the next chapter, the world would learn what kind of city buries the truth. And what happens when it digs itself out. The courthouse steps had never felt so heavy. Not for Gloria Hines. Not after everything. As she stood before the double glass doors of the building where her life, and her city, had been pulled inside out, she didn't think about Bennett. She didn't think about the bruises. Not even the way the sidewalk felt against her back the moment his hand gripped her throat. She thought about the silence. How long she'd lived with it. How many others had too. But silence was no longer a shelter. It was a prison. And today they were breaking out. Inside, the courtroom was packed. There were no empty rows, no quiet corners. Every seat was filled with someone who carried a story, someone who, until now, had been told it wasn't worth telling. Miles sat beside her, his suit sharp, his eyes steady. Janice stood just behind him, flanked by Monroe and Devon, their team more of a family now than an alliance. The state's attorney approached the bench. The judge, an older black woman named Justice Kareem, nodded for her to proceed. "Your Honor," she began, her voice reverberating, "what we present today is not merely about one man or one violent moment. It is about a department that lost its soul. And about the people who found the courage to demand it back." She walked the jury through the tapes. Through the testimonies. Through years of shredded documents, tampered footage, and forced silence. But the most damning piece? A memo discovered just days earlier. Hidden in the desk of a former precinct secretary. It was titled, "Operational Pressure Response, Community Dissent Strategy." Inside, explicit instructions to monitor, intimidate, and suppress known community organizers, especially Black and Latino ones. Signatures of approval from 3 now-resigned deputy chiefs. Gloria couldn't believe it at first. Not because it was too shocking, but because it made too much sense. They hadn't just tried to scare her. They had tried to erase her. The verdict came after only 4 hours of jury deliberation. Kyle Bennett, guilty on all counts, assault, abuse of power, tampering with evidence, and participating in an unlawful targeted surveillance program. But that wasn't the end. Because Justice Kareem did something unexpected. She turned her eyes toward the crowd. "In my 30 years on this bench, I have never seen a case like this. Not because police abuse is rare, but because justice in cases like these is." She paused. "This court recognizes the bravery of Gloria Hines. But it also acknowledges the failures of every institution that allowed this to happen in the first place. Let this be the beginning, not the end, of our reckoning. And then she did something no one anticipated. She invited Gloria to speak. Gloria stood. Her legs, still sore, still recovering, were strong beneath her. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "And I didn't speak up because I thought I'd win." The room was quiet. "I spoke because I was tired of feeling like my dignity depended on someone else's mercy. I spoke because too many people never got the chance to." She looked around the courtroom, at faces both familiar and not. "This moment doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the young boy who got pulled over and never made it home. To the mother who asked why and was told she talked too much. To every name we didn't have time to say." A tear slid down her cheek. Not out of sadness, but power. "So now, I ask all of you, what are you going to do with this moment?" The video of her speech was viewed over 12 million times in 3 days. It became more than a courtroom story. It became a call. Local precincts began reviewing misconduct cases. Schools started teaching sessions on constitutional rights. A new community oversight board, named after Gloria Hines, was formed to monitor and report law enforcement behavior. But more importantly, something changed in the people. They looked each other in the eye more. They spoke up more. They remembered. Weeks later, Gloria sat on her porch, sipping tea as the sun went down. Her bruises had faded. Her heart, though scarred, had opened. Miles joined her with a quiet smile. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. She thought for a long moment. "No," she said. "Because the truth is, they didn't just choke me that day. They tried to choke a movement." She sipped again. "But the thing about truth? You can't bury it. You can only delay it." She looked at her son. "You made me proud. But more than that, you made me believe again." In the distance, a group of teens walked by, one of them stopping to nod at Gloria. "Thank you," the girl said, hand over heart. Gloria smiled. Because now her voice echoed not just in courtrooms, but in classrooms, council halls, and kitchen tables across the country. This wasn't just a win. This was a beginning. And now, to every person watching this, if Gloria's story moved you, if you've ever felt silenced, dismissed, or invisible, know this: your voice matters. Your story matters. The fight is far from over, but every time we speak, every time we stand, every time we share the truth, we move closer to justice. So tell us, what does justice look like in your community? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you believe in truth over silence. Share it if you know someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because we have more stories that demand to be heard. Because sometimes, it only takes one voice to start an unstoppable wave. And today, that voice was Gloria Hines.